The Roman emperor who tried to ban beans, you might think that the grand tapestry of Roman history, with its emperors, legions, and monumental achievements, would be woven solely with threads of conquest, political intrigue, and engineering marvels. But if you listen closely, beyond the clamor of the forum and the clash of swords, you'll hear the quiet rustle of leaves, the gentle murmur of a market, and perhaps the humble crunch of a bean. For in the annals of this vast empire, amidst the sagas of power and glory, there exists a curious footnote, a tale of a most unexpected imperial decree, the attempted banishment of a simple legume. We are speaking, of course, of the fava bean, or Vicia faba, as it was known to the botanists of the day, a plant whose unassuming nature belied its profound and sometimes perplexing impact on Roman life, and thought that our journey begins not with a battle or a legislative session, but with a philosophy, specifically the tenets of Pythagoreanism. Now, when you hear Pythagoras, your mind likely drifts to triangles and theorems, to the elegant geometry that underpins much of our modern world. But Pythagoras was far more than a mathematician. He was a mystic, a philosopher, and the founder of a brotherhood whose influence stretched across the ancient world, from the shores of Magna Graecia, southern Italy, and Sicily, to the intellectual salons of Athens. For the Pythagoreans, life was an intricate dance of harmony and proportion, where every action, every thought, and indeed every morsel consumed, held profound significance. Their philosophy was holistic, encompassing cosmology, ethics, music, and diet. And central to their dietary regulations, a prohibition as steadfast as any moral injunction, was the absolute avoidance of beans. Why beans, you might wonder? The reasons are as varied and enigmatic as the Pythagoreans themselves. Some accounts suggest a purely practical, almost medical, rationale. Beans, particularly when consumed in large quantities, can cause flatulence and indigestion disturbances that would undoubtedly disrupt the meditative serenity so highly prized by the Brotherhood. Imagine, if you will, a group of ascetics striving for intellectual clarity and spiritual enlightenment, only to be plagued by the very earthly discomforts brought on by a hearty bean stew. It simply wouldn't do. However, the Pythagorean aversion to beans runs deeper than mere digestive discomfort. There were strong mystical and symbolic interpretations. One prevalent belief held that beans, with their hollow stems and sometimes dark markings, were intimately connected to the underworld, to the realm of the dead. It was thought that the souls of the deceased could somehow reside within them, or that consuming them was akin to consuming human flesh, a profound violation of their deeply held belief in metempsychosis, the transmigration of souls. If a soul could be reborn into an animal or a plant, then eating a bean might be equivalent to consuming a departed ancestor, a thought utterly repugnant to their spiritual sensibilities. Consider also the visual symbolism. The fava bean, when split open, reveals a shape eerily reminiscent of human genitalia, a connection that may have been seen as impure or perhaps as representing the cycle of birth and death in a way that was too visceral for their refined spiritual practices. Furthermore, the act of planting a bean, watching it sprout from the earth, was seen by some as a direct connection to the primeval ooze, the very stuff from which life emerged, a process that could be considered too chaotic or earthy for their pursuit of a higher, more ordered existence. The very act of touching a bean was, for some Pythagoreans, an act to be avoided at all costs. Diogenes Laertius, a biographer of ancient philosophers, even recounted the story of Pythagoras himself, fleeing from pursuers rather than crossing a field of beans, choosing death over violating this sacred taboo. A rather extreme reaction, wouldn't you agree, for a humble legume? The influence of Pythagoreanism, while seemingly esoteric, seeped into various aspects of Roman society, especially among the more intellectual and philosophical elite. It wasn't uncommon for Roman thinkers to dabble in Greek philosophies, adopting elements that resonated with their own perspectives or offered new insights into the world. And so the humble bean, an everyday staple for many, found itself caught in the philosophical crosscurrents of the ancient world. Now, fast forward several centuries, the Roman Empire has grown vast, encompassing diverse cultures and culinary traditions. Beans in various forms were a dietary cornerstone for the vast majority of its citizens. They were cheap, nutritious, and easy to grow, providing essential protein and fiber for soldiers, farmers, and urban dwellers alike. Lentils, chickpeas, and of course fava beans formed a significant part of the Roman diet, often boiled into thick porridges, stews, or ground into flour for bread. Imagine the sheer volume of beans consumed daily across the empire, from the legions campaigning in Gaul to the families dining in their modest homes in Ostia. Yet, despite their widespread consumption, the old Pythagorean prejudices lingered. In certain circles, particularly among those who prided themselves on their adherence to ancient traditions or philosophical purity. This brings us to a specific and rather peculiar historical figure who, whether directly inspired by Pythagorean ideals or simply holding a personal aversion, attempted to elevate this dietary preference into imperial policy. We are speaking of Emperor Diocletian. Diocletian, who reigned from 284 to 305 AD, was a figure of immense historical significance. He is often credited with rescuing the Roman Empire from a period of severe crisis, implementing sweeping reforms that fundamentally reshaped its governance, military, and economy. His reign saw the establishment of the Tetrarchy, a system of co-emperors designed to ensure stability and more efficient administration across the vast empire. He was a man of order, discipline, and grand vision, obsessed with restoring the glory and strength of Rome. You might picture him as a stern, pragmatic leader, meticulously poring over maps and ledgers, not, perhaps, as someone preoccupied with the dietary habits of his subjects. But even the most formidable emperors have their quirks, their personal convictions that sometimes spill over into matters of state. While Diocletian's primary concerns were undoubtedly military defense, administrative efficiency, and economic stability, historical accounts, though sparse and sometimes contradictory, suggest a peculiar interest in certain foodstuffs. It's here that the fava bean re-enters our narrative. The precise motivations behind Diocletian's purported attempt to ban beans are shrouded in the mists of antiquity, obscured by the passage of time and the limited nature of surviving historical records. It's not as if official edicts on legumes were meticulously carved into stone tablets for posterity. Rather, whispers and fragments from later chroniclers and commentators hint at this unusual imperial foray into diet. One theory, perhaps the most straightforward links Diocletian's supposed edict directly to the lingering influence of Pythagorean philosophy. It's plausible that as a man interested in order and societal well-being, he might have viewed the bean as something disruptive, either to physical health as understood by ancient physicians, or to the more abstract spiritual well-being of his subjects. If certain influential philosophical or medical texts of his era condemned beans, even for the most esoteric reasons, an emperor seeking to impose order and promote what he believed to be good practices might take such warnings seriously. Another possibility lies in the realm of economic or logistical concerns. While beans were generally cheap and widely available, perhaps there were times or regions where their cultivation or distribution posed problems. Could it have been an attempt to encourage other crops, seen as more valuable or strategically important for the empire's food supply? This seems less likely given the widespread nature of bean cultivation, but it's a possibility one must consider when dealing with imperial decrees. However, the existing fragments of evidence point more towards a philosophical or even superstitious rationale rather than a purely economic one. Consider the atmosphere of the late Roman Empire, a time when traditional Roman values were being re-evaluated and various Eastern and philosophical cults were gaining traction. Emperors as leaders and sometimes even as quasi-divine figures often took it upon themselves to guide the moral and physical health of their populace. For a ruler as meticulous and controlling as Diocletian, it wouldn't be entirely out of character to extend his regulatory zeal to areas that seem trivial to us today, but which held significant cultural or philosophical weight in his time. The specific details of this attempted ban, if indeed it was a formal edict, remain elusive. Was it a complete prohibition across the entire empire? Was it merely a recommendation, a discouragement, or perhaps a localized ban in a particular region or for certain groups? The surviving evidence is frustratingly vague, leaving us to piece together a fragmented picture from historical allusions rather than direct imperial decrees. However, the mere fact that such an attempt is even mentioned, however briefly, in historical sources, speaks volumes about the enduring legacy of the Pythagorean aversion to beans and the willingness of even the most powerful emperors to meddle in the minutiae of their subjects' lives. This episode, though minor in the grand sweep of Roman history, offers a fascinating glimpse into the less examined aspects of imperial power and the surprising ways in which ancient philosophies could manifest in unexpected policies. It reminds us that history is not just about grand battles and political maneuvers, but also about the quiet, sometimes peculiar, customs and beliefs that shaped the daily lives of ordinary people. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the silent rebellion of the fava bean stubbornly thriving in fields across the empire, even as emperors pondered its fate. Our journey into the peculiar world of imperial bean legislation continues, moving beyond the philosophical origins of the Pythagorean bean aversion and into the practical, or rather impractical, realities of implementing such a decree in the vast and diverse Roman Empire. If, as historical whispers suggest, Emperor Diocletian truly entertained the notion of a bean ban, the logistics alone would have been a monumental, perhaps even impossible, undertaking. Imagine, if you will, the sheer scale of such an enforcement, the Fava bean, alongside other legumes like lentils and chickpeas, was not merely a dietary supplement for the Romans. It was a fundamental pillar of their sustenance, especially for the common people. Think of the pulse, a thick porridge made from grains and legumes, often seasoned with herbs and a little oil, which served as a staple meal for many Roman families. It was the ancient equivalent of our daily bread, cheap to produce, easy to store, and highly nutritious. Soldiers on campaign relied on dried beans for their energy and protein. Farmers cultivated them not only for their own consumption, but also as a vital cash crop. The very soil of Italy and the empire's provinces was accustomed to their growth, enriching the earth with nitrogen, a natural benefit understood through empirical observation, if not scientific explanation. To suddenly remove such a pervasive food source would have been akin to trying to ban wheat in modern times, an absurdity on an epic scale, almost certainly leading to widespread discontent, economic disruption, and even famine. Consider the immense diversity of the Roman Empire, stretching from the cold reaches of Britannia to the sun-drenched sands of Egypt. Each province had its own agricultural practices, its own traditional dishes, and its own preferred crops. While wheat and barley were ubiquitous, legumes often filled dietary gaps, especially in areas where other protein sources were scarce or expensive. A ban on beans, even if limited to fava beans, would have struck at the heart of local economies and daily routines. How would such a ban be enforced? Would there be bean inspectors scouring markets and fields? Would a simple fava bean stew become contraband, leading to illicit bean trading networks across the empire? The very thought borders on the comical, highlighting the immense disconnect between an emperor's philosophical inclinations and the practical realities of governing millions of diverse subjects. Furthermore, the Roman legal system, while sophisticated, was primarily concerned with matters of property, citizenship, and public order. Dietary restrictions, unless tied to religious practices, which were often tolerated or integrated, or sumptuary laws, which aimed at curbing excessive luxury, not basic foodstuffs, were rarely the subject of imperial decree and edict targeting. A common food item would have been unprecedented and likely met with confusion, resistance, and outright disregard by the general populace. The average Roman citizen, struggling to feed their family, would likely have prioritized their next meal over an abstract philosophical prescription from a distant emperor. It's crucial to remember that much of our understanding of ancient history comes from fragmented sources, texts, inscriptions, archaeological findings, often interpreted by later generations. The specific accounts mentioning Diocletian's aversion to beans are not found in his official pronouncements or in the meticulously kept records of the imperial chancellery. Instead, they appear as anecdotal mentions in later philosophical commentaries or biographical sketches, often centuries after his reign. For instance, the Byzantine Encyclopedia Suda, compiled in the 10th century, contains a brief entry linking Diocletian to a dislike of fava beans, perhaps echoing earlier lost sources. These accounts are more akin to historical gossip or philosophical footnotes than concrete legal statutes. This raises an important question. Was it truly an imperial ban, or merely a personal dietary preference that became exaggerated over time, possibly even misinterpreted? It's entirely plausible that Diocletian, influenced by his own philosophical leanings or personal aversions, simply avoided beans himself and perhaps encouraged those in his immediate court to do the same. This kind of soft influence from a powerful figure could easily be misinterpreted or amplified by subsequent generations into a formal, empire-wide prohibition. Imagine an emperor dining and simply declining beans from the imperial table, perhaps with a comment about their digestibility or their philosophical implications. This small act, observed by courtiers, could then ripple outwards, morphing into a grander narrative over time. Consider for a moment the Roman mindset towards food. While bread and grain were paramount, Romans also enjoyed a wide variety of vegetables, fruits, cheeses, and meats, depending on their social status and regional availability. Food was often imbued with symbolic meaning. Certain foods were associated with particular deities, festivals, or social classes. For example, garlic and onions were often seen as foods for the working class, while more refined palates might prefer delicate pastries or exotic fruits. In this context, a philosophical aversion to a common food like beans, even if it originated from a specific school of thought, wouldn't be entirely out of place in the broader Roman cultural landscape. The enduring myth or anecdote of Diocletian's bean ban also highlights the subtle ways in which personal eccentricities of powerful rulers can become intertwined with official history. We often focus on the grand narratives, the wars, the treaties, the monumental constructions, but history is also shaped by the myriad small decisions, personal tastes, and philosophical inclinations of individuals, even if their impact is more anecdotal than legislative. Diocletian, the architect of the Tetrarchy, the persecutor of Christians, the restorer of imperial authority, also remains associated with this curious dietary preference, a small human detail that cuts through the imposing image of the emperor. This fascination with peculiar dietary habits of historical figures is not unique to Rome. Throughout history, various cultures and individuals have had strong feelings about specific foods, often rooted in religious beliefs, philosophical principles, or perceived health benefits. From the dietary laws of ancient Judaism to the vegetarianism of certain Hindu sects, food has always been more than mere sustenance. It is a cultural signifier, a spiritual tool, and sometimes a matter of deep, personal conviction. The Roman aversion to beans, as exemplified by the Pythagoreans, and perhaps briefly echoed by Diocletian, fits into this broader human tendency to imbue food with meaning beyond its nutritional value. So, while the idea of an empire-wide bean ban under Diocletian remains largely in the realm of intriguing historical anecdote rather than documented fact, its persistence speaks volumes. It tells us about the enduring legacy of Greek philosophy and Roman thought, the curious interplay between personal belief and public policy, and the fascinating ways in which seemingly trivial details can find a lasting place in the grand narrative of history. It also serves as a gentle reminder that even the most powerful rulers were, in their own way, just as human and susceptible to personal quirks as anyone else. But how effective could such a ban, even a tacit one, truly have been? And what does its possible failure tell us about the resilience of ordinary life against imperial decree? Our exploration of the emperor and the humble fava bean culminates here, As we consider the ultimate fate of this peculiar imperial endeavor and its lasting implications, or rather, the lack thereof, if indeed Diocletian, the stern and reforming emperor, harbored a desire to curb the consumption of beans, history provides a resounding, albeit silent, answer. His efforts, if they existed beyond personal preference, were utterly ineffectual. The fava bean, resilient and deeply embedded in the agricultural and culinary fabric of the Roman Empire, continued to flourish, feeding countless citizens long after Diocletian's abdication and the eventual decline of the empire he sought to stabilize. The sheer impracticality of enforcing such a ban is the most compelling evidence of its likely failure. Imagine the logistical nightmare. The Roman state, for all its might, struggled with far more critical issues, defending vast borders, managing complex economies, and suppressing rebellions. To divert resources to monitoring and enforcing a ban on a common foodstuff would have been an administrative folly of epic proportions. The cost-benefit analysis would have been overwhelmingly negative. The social unrest, the economic disruption, and the sheer impossibility of inspecting every farm, every market, and every kitchen across a continent-spanning empire would have quickly rendered any such edict dead on arrival. Instead, the fava bean, along with its legume cousins, remained a dietary cornerstone throughout the Roman period and beyond. Archaeological excavations of Roman sites consistently unearth evidence of bean cultivation and consumption, from carbonized remains in storage jars to illustrations in ancient agricultural texts. Cookbooks and dietary treatises from the era make no mention of imperial prohibitions on beans. On the contrary, they feature prominently in recipes for pulls, stews, and various other dishes enjoyed by Romans of all social strata. This pervasive evidence stands in stark contrast to any notion of a widespread enforced ban. Consider also the long-term historical trajectory. No subsequent Roman emperor, no major historical chronicle, picked up the mantle of an anti-bean crusade. The idea seems to have faded into the realm of curious anecdote, a philosophical footnote rather than a significant imperial policy. This absence of continuation strongly suggests that if Diocletian did attempt such a ban, it was either a short-lived personal whim, poorly enforced, or so localized and minor in scope as to have made no discernible impact on the vast machinery of Roman life. The resilience of tradition, economy, and everyday necessity simply overwhelmed any fleeting imperial dietary preference. The story of Diocletian and the beans, even if largely apocryphal in its ban aspect, serves as a fascinating lens through which to view the limitations of even absolute power. Emperors, despite their vast authority, were not omnipotent. They ruled over societies with deeply ingrained customs, economic realities, and the fundamental needs of their populace. Attempting to legislate against something as basic and ubiquitous as a staple food item was, and largely remains, an exercise in futility. It underscores the profound wisdom of understanding the practical constraints within which any governing body must operate. Moreover, this tale, however minor, offers a gentle insight into the enduring human tendency to impose order and meaning onto the world, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. For the Pythagoreans, the bean was a symbol of cosmic connection, a source of spiritual peril. For Diocletian, perhaps it was a detail that offended his sense of order or his personal convictions. But for the vast majority of Romans, it was simply food, sustenance, energy, and a source of comfort. The resilience of this humble legume, thriving despite philosophical prescriptions and potential imperial disfavor, is a testament to the enduring power of practical necessity and cultural tradition over abstract ideals. In a broader sense, this narrative reminds us that history is not just about the grand pronouncements from on high, but also about the quiet, persistent pulse of daily life. While emperors waged wars, built monuments, and crafted complex legal codes, ordinary people continued to plant their crops, prepare their meals, and live their lives, often oblivious or indifferent to the philosophical debates and personal quirks of their distant rulers. The fava bean, silently growing in fields across the empire, represents this quiet, enduring force, a testament to the human need for nourishment and the unstoppable rhythm of agricultural life. So, as you drift into a restful state, consider the subtle irony. A powerful emperor who reorganized an entire empire and battled its decline found his name forever linked, however faintly, to a failed attempt to ban a simple bean. Meanwhile, the fava bean, far from being banished, continued its journey through history, feeding civilizations, enriching soils, and quietly contributing to the tapestry of human existence, long after the empires and their peculiar prescriptions had faded into memory. It's a gentle reminder that some things, however small, are simply too essential to be commanded away, too deeply rooted to be uprooted by even the mightiest of hands. The boring history of the bean, it turns out, is a history of quiet triumph. The boring history for sleep. How ancient Egyptians mummified their pets. You might imagine the grand tombs of ancient Egypt, filled with glittering gold, intricate hieroglyphs, and the preserved bodies of pharaohs, queens, and nobles, all prepared for their eternal journey. But beyond the majestic burial chambers of the human elite lies a quieter, perhaps more poignant, testament to ancient Egyptian beliefs and affections, the mummified remains of animals. For the Egyptians, the line between the sacred and the mundane was often blurred, and their deep reverence for life, death, and the divine extended far beyond the human realm. The practice of animal mummification, far from being a quirky footnote, offers a profound insight into their spiritual landscape, their relationship with the natural world, and their surprisingly tender connection with creatures great and small. We speak of animal mummification. It's important to understand that it wasn't a single, uniform practice. Just as human mummification varied in complexity and expense depending on the deceased's status, so too did the preservation of animals. At one end of the spectrum you had the meticulously prepared mummies of beloved household pets, wrapped with care and interred alongside their owners, clearly intended as companions in the afterlife. At the other, there were vast catacombs filled with millions of animal mummies, often ritually sacrificed and offered as votives to specific deities, acting as intermediaries between the earthly and divine realms. It is this fascinating spectrum from personal devotion to religious offering that we shall gently explore. Let us begin with the beloved companions. Imagine a wealthy Egyptian family, perhaps dwelling in a spacious villa along the Nile. Life was often hard, marked by the cycles of the inundation, the demands of agriculture, and the ever-present shadow of illness. In such a world, a loyal dog, a graceful cat, or even a playful monkey could offer immense comfort and companionship. Dogs, in particular, were highly valued, serving as guardians, hunting partners, and cherished members of the family. Evidence suggests that some dogs were even given personal names, a rare honor in a society where most people were identified by their lineage or profession. Cats, revered for their ability to control pests, also held a special place, embodying grace and later associated with deities like Bastet. When a cherished pet died, the grief felt by its human companions would have been profound. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a transition, a journey to the field of reeds, a paradise much like their own fertile Nile Valley. And if humans needed provisions and companions for this journey, why not their loyal animals? Thus, for some fortunate creatures, the elaborate rituals of mummification, typically reserved for humans, were extended. This process mirrored in many ways the human procedure, though often on a smaller scale and with variations depending on the animal's size and the owner's resources. The first step, as with human mummification, involved the removal of internal organs. For larger animals, this might have involved incisions, much like those made on human bodies. For smaller creatures, simpler methods might have been employed. The brain, if removed, would have been done so through the nostrils, a delicate operation. These organs, if preserved, would sometimes be placed in miniature canopic jars or wrapped in linen and reinserted into the body cavity. This removal was crucial, as internal organs were the first to decompose, undermining the entire preservation process. Following evisceration, the body cavity would be cleansed and often packed with materials to help absorb moisture and maintain the animal's form. This could include linen scraps, sawdust, or even aromatic resins. Then came the critical phase, natron drying. Natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture found in abundance in Egypt, was the key to desiccation. The animal's body would be entirely covered in natron, a process that could take several weeks, slowly drawing out all the moisture and preventing putrefaction. Imagine the quiet, arid air of the embalming workshop, the faint scent of natron permeating the space as the careful process unfolded. This slow, steady desiccation was what truly preserved the tissue, turning soft flesh into hardened, desiccated form. Once thoroughly dried, the animal's body would be carefully cleaned and prepared for wrapping. This stage often involved stuffing the body cavity further to restore a more lifelike shape, particularly for smaller creatures. Resins might be applied, sometimes poured into the body cavity or brushed onto the skin, acting as an antiseptic and providing a protective layer. The most meticulous preparations might even include placing artificial eyes in the sockets, giving the deceased animal a semblance of watchful presence. Finally, the wrapping. This was an art form in itself. Long strips of linen, often of fine quality, would be wound meticulously around the animal's body, layer upon layer. The skill of the embalmer determined the neatness and effectiveness of this wrapping. Sometimes specific patterns were created with the linen strips, or the outer layers were painted with designs, even featuring the animal's face or stylized images of deities. Charms, amulets, and often small papyri inscribed with prayers or magical spells might be tucked between the layers of linen intended to protect the animal in the afterlife or ensure its safe passage. These mummified pets were then interred. Some might be placed directly in the tomb chamber of their owners, often at their feet or in a dedicated niche. Others were given their own miniature coffins, exquisitely crafted from wood or even gilded cartonnage, sometimes mimicking the human sarcophagi with painted details and hieroglyphic inscriptions. The discovery of such pet burials, like the grave of a dog named Abuti Yu from the Old Kingdom, interred with fine linen and provisions, offers a rare and touching glimpse into the deep emotional bonds that transcended species in ancient Egypt. It's a reminder that even in a world so distant from our own, the simple act of loving a pet and wishing for its continued presence was a profound human experience. But this, as you might suspect, is only one part of the story. Beyond these cherished companions lies another, far larger realm of animal mummification, driven not by personal affection, but by profound religious devotion. And it is in this spiritual dimension that the practice truly reaches its colossal scale. Having explored the tender practice of mummifying cherished animal companions, our journey now takes us into the vast and sometimes bewildering landscape of votive animal mummification, a phenomenon of an entirely different scale and purpose. This was not about preserving a beloved pet for the afterlife, but about creating millions of sacred offerings to deities, a complex interplay of religion, economy, and the mundane reality of animal husbandry. The sheer volume of these mummies, discovered in sprawling catacombs across Egypt, speaks to a deeply ingrained and widespread religious practice, a testament to the Egyptians' fervent desire to connect with the divine. The ancient Egyptians worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses, many of whom were associated with specific animals, embodying their characteristics or serving as their sacred manifestations. Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, was linked to the ibis and the baboon. Horus, the sky god, was represented by the falcon. Bastet, the goddess of home, fertility, and protection, was inextricably linked with the cat. Anubis, the god of mummification, and the afterlife was depicted as a jackal or a jackal-headed man. To offer a mummified animal associated with a particular deity was believed to be a direct way to communicate with that god, to offer a prayer, seek a favor, or express gratitude. It was, in essence, a tangible prayer, a physical manifestation of devotion. Imagine, if you will, pilgrims flocking to temple complexes dedicated to these animal deities. Take Saqqara, for instance, a vast necropolis where immense catacombs house millions upon millions of mummified ibises and baboons, offerings to Thoth, or Bubastis, the cult center of Bastet, where cat mummies were interred in staggering numbers. These were not wild animals captured and killed for the purpose. They were often specially bred in temple precincts, raised to be ritually sacrificed and mummified. The process for these votive mummies, while still involving desiccation and wrapping, was often less elaborate than that for beloved pets or high-status humans. Efficiency and volume were key. The internal organs might not be removed with the same meticulous care. Sometimes simpler methods of evisceration, or even no evisceration at all, were used for smaller creatures. Natron drying remained crucial, but the quality of the natron and the duration of the drying process might have varied. The emphasis was on preservation for the symbolic act of offering, rather than on perfect anatomical integrity. The wrapping, too, reflected this practical approach. While some votive mummies could be quite artfully wrapped, with intricate geometric patterns or painted details, many were simply encased in coarse linen strips, sometimes dipped in resin, forming a more utilitarian, tightly bound bundle. The outer appearance, however, often maintained a stylized shape resembling the animal, even if the mummy inside was a mere shadow of its former self. Think of the millions of cone-shaped ibis mummies, or the sleek, cat-shaped bundles that filled their respective burial chambers. The sheer scale of this practice is difficult for us to fully comprehend. Excavations have revealed catacombs stretching for miles, filled floor to ceiling with animal mummies. At Tuna el Gebel, a site associated with Thoth, archaeologists estimated the presence of 4 million ibis burials. At Saqqara, vast galleries hold millions of dog mummies and an even greater number of cats. This wasn't a casual, occasional offering. It was an industry, a massive religious enterprise that required careful organization, dedicated personnel, and a continuous supply of animals. This brings us to a fascinating, yet somewhat grim, aspect of the votive animal mummification industry: the breeding and rearing of animals specifically for this purpose. Imagine large-scale aviaries for ibises, or compounds for cats, dogs, and falcons, all meticulously maintained by temple staff. These animals were not wild. They were often domesticated and bred in captivity, ensuring a steady supply for the pilgrims and priests. This system would have involved significant agricultural and economic infrastructure, from growing fodder for the animals to employing skilled handlers and embalmers. It was a complex system of supply and demand, driven by religious fervor. The motivation behind these offerings was diverse. A devout Egyptian might purchase a mummified cat to offer to Bastet in hopes of warding off illness or ensuring a safe childbirth. A farmer might offer an ibis mummy to Thoth, seeking wisdom for a good harvest. Soldiers might pray to Horus, offering a mummified falcon for victory in battle. The act of offering was a deeply personal ritual, yet it fed into a massive, industrialized, religious economy. Pilgrims would purchase the mummies from temple vendors, present them to the priests, and then witness their interment in the sacred catacombs. The discovery of these vast animal cemeteries in modern times has provided an invaluable window into ancient Egyptian religious practices, animal husbandry, and even their understanding of anatomy. X-rays and CT scans of these mummies often reveal surprising details. Sometimes the wrong animal is inside a beautifully wrapped mummy, a hawk inside a cat mummy, for example, suggesting perhaps a scam or a hurried substitution, or multiple animals in one bundle. Sometimes only partial remains are present, or even just a few bones, indicating that the symbolic act of offering the mummy was perhaps more important than the perfection of the animal within. These discoveries offer a glimpse into the complexities and sometimes the imperfections of ancient religious industries. The practice of votive mummification peaked during the late period, c. 664 to 332 BCE, and the Greco-Roman period, c. 332 BCE, 395 CE, times when foreign rulers governed Egypt. Paradoxically, during these periods of foreign domination, Egyptian religious practices, including animal cults, often intensified as a way to preserve cultural identity. The demand for mummified offerings soared, leading to the massive scale of breeding and mummification we see in the archaeological record. This journey through votive mummification reveals a society deeply intertwined with its gods, where every creature could serve as a conduit to the divine. But what became of these millions of mummies, and what further secrets have they yielded about ancient Egyptian life and belief? Our final descent into the quiet, dusty catacombs of ancient Egypt brings us to the profound aftermath of animal mummification, the ultimate resting places of these millions of creatures, and the unexpected insights they continue to offer us in the modern age. The sheer scale of the burials, particularly of the votive mummies, is a testament not only to religious fervor but also to an astonishingly organized and persistent industry. These vast repositories, stretching for miles beneath the desert sands, represent an archive of animal life, ancient beliefs, and human-animal interactions that continues to fascinate and inform us. Once mummified, the animal offerings, whether beloved pets or temple-bred sacrifices, were interred in specific locations. For pets, as we discussed, this might be within the owner's tomb or in a dedicated burial spot nearby. For the votive animals, however, specialized catacombs and vast cemeteries were constructed. Imagine these subterranean labyrinths carved out of the soft limestone with endless niches and galleries meticulously stacked with mummified animals. Each cult had its designated burial grounds, the ibis and baboon mummies for Thoth, found at Saqqara and Tuna el Gebel, the cat mummies for Bastet at Bubastis, the dog mummies for Anubis at Saqqara, and various bird and reptile mummies for other associated deities. The act of interment itself was a sacred ritual. Priests would oversee the placement of the mummies, ensuring they were properly oriented and that any associated prayers or spells were recited. While the individual mummies might be simple in their wrapping, the collective impression of these catacombs would have been overwhelming, a silent physical manifestation of millions of prayers and acts of devotion. The air within these chambers, once sealed, would have been dry and still, preserving their contents for millennia. In modern times, the rediscovery of these animal catacombs, often by chance or during systematic archaeological surveys in the 19th and 20th centuries, was met with a mixture of wonder and bewilderment. Early excavators seeking human treasures sometimes disregarded the animal mummies, viewing them as less significant. Tragically, millions were destroyed or ground down for fertilizer due to their perceived lack of value. It wasn't until later, with the advent of more scientific archaeology and a growing appreciation for the full spectrum of ancient Egyptian life, that the immense significance of these animal burials truly came to light. Today, these mummies are not merely curiosities. They are invaluable scientific specimens. Advanced techniques like X-rays, CT scans, and DNA analysis allow researchers to peer beneath the ancient linen wrappings without causing damage. These studies have yielded extraordinary insights. For instance, detailed skeletal analysis can reveal the health and diet of the animals, offering clues about ancient animal husbandry practices. Pathological conditions like arthritis, broken bones, or tumors can be identified, telling us about the lives these animals led. Sometimes even the last meal of an animal can be discerned from preserved stomach contents, providing direct evidence of their diet. The DNA analysis of these mummified remains is particularly revolutionary. It can help trace the genetic lineage of ancient animal populations, shedding light on domestication processes and the relationships between ancient Egyptian breeds and their modern descendants. For example, studies on mummified cats have illuminated their journey from wild felines to beloved companions and the origins of modern cat breeds. This intersection of archaeology and cutting-edge science allows us to reconstruct aspects of the ancient world that would have been impossible to grasp just a few decades ago. Furthermore, the study of animal mummies contributes to our understanding of ancient Egyptian religious beliefs and social structures. The variations in mummification quality, from highly elaborate to very rudimentary, often reflect the economic status of the offering party or the purpose of the offering. A beautifully wrapped pet in a decorated coffin speaks of individual wealth and affection, while a simple, mass-produced votive mummy points to the accessibility of religious practice for all social classes. It highlights how religious acts could be both deeply personal and part of a mass-produced, industrialized system. The legacy of animal mummification also extends to the ongoing cultural fascination with ancient Egypt. These mummies, with their poignant stories of belief and companionship, continue to be displayed in museums worldwide, captivating audiences and sparking curiosity about a civilization that saw life, death, and the animal kingdom through such a unique spiritual lens. They remind us that the ancient Egyptians were not so different from us in their capacity for love and devotion towards animals, even if their methods of expressing it were profoundly shaped by their distinct worldview. In conclusion, the story of how ancient Egyptians mummified their pets and votive animals is far more than a boring historical fact. It is a rich tapestry woven with threads of personal grief, profound religious belief, economic enterprise, and scientific discovery. It reveals a civilization that saw the entire world, animate and inanimate, as part of a divine order, and sought to bridge the gap between earthly existence and the eternal realm through meticulous preservation. The quiet, desiccated forms of these ancient creatures, lying for millennia in their dusty chambers, speak volumes about a culture that honored all forms of life, believing that even the smallest cat or the humblest ibis could carry a prayer to the gods or join a human soul on its journey into the endless fields of the afterlife. It's a testament to the enduring power of belief and the silent ways in which the past continues to communicate with us. Boring history for sleep. The peculiar practices of Victorian letter writing. Imagine a world before instant messages, before emails, before even the telephone's persistent ring. A world where communication across distances was a deliberate, often slow, and profoundly personal act. This was the reality for the Victorians, a society that, despite its burgeoning industrial might and technological advancements, relied overwhelmingly on the written word to connect across cities, counties, and continents. Letter writing in the Victorian era was not merely a utilitarian exchange of information. It was an art form, a social ritual, and a labyrinth of unspoken rules and peculiar practices that might seem utterly baffling to us today. It offers a quiet, fascinating glimpse into the intricate social fabric of the 19th century, a time when pen, ink, and paper were the primary conduits of human connection. The sheer volume of correspondence during the Victorian age is staggering. With the establishment of the penny post in 1840 in the United Kingdom, sending a letter became affordable for almost everyone, democratizing communication in an unprecedented way. Before this, postage was often paid by the recipient and could be prohibitively expensive, leading to practices like sending letters with only half the message written to indicate all is well, or complex codes on envelopes. The penny post, a flat rate for a letter, regardless of distance, within the UK, revolutionized this, leading to an explosion of literacy and correspondence. Suddenly, families separated by miles could stay in touch regularly. Lovers could exchange heartfelt sentiments, and businesses could conduct affairs with greater ease. This surge meant that postmen became ubiquitous figures, their daily rounds a vital artery of social life. But merely sending a letter was only the beginning. The act of writing itself was steeped in custom. Consider the materials. Stationery was not a trivial matter. It was a reflection of one's social standing, taste, and the nature of the correspondence. For formal letters or business, crisp, plain white or cream paper, often thick and good quality, was essential. Mourning stationery, for instance, was strictly regulated, heavy black borders for deep mourning, gradually thinning over time as the period of grief lessened. Imagine the meticulousness required to choose the correct stationery, conveying a silent message even before a single word was read. For more personal letters, colored papers or embossed designs might be used, but always with an eye to propriety. The writing instruments were equally significant. The quill pen, though still in use early in the era, gradually gave way to the ubiquitous dip pen with its metal nibs, requiring a constant re-dipping into an inkwell. This wasn't a fluid, continuous flow like a modern ballpoint. It was a rhythmic dance of writing, lifting, dipping, and writing again, each stroke a conscious effort. Ink, typically iron gall ink, was prone to blotting, necessitating the use of blotting paper or sand to dry the freshly written words. Imagine the patience required, the steady hand, the mindfulness of each carefully formed letter. Errors were not easily corrected. A smudge could ruin an entire page, sometimes requiring a complete rewrite. The very structure of a letter was formalized. It began with a precise salutation, from the most formal "Sir" or "Madam" to the more intimate "My dearest name." The body of the letter would unfold with carefully constructed sentences, often adhering to strict grammatical and rhetorical conventions. Victorian prose, particularly in personal letters, could be quite elaborate, rich with flowery language and extended metaphors. This wasn't just stylistic preference. It was a reflection of the value placed on eloquence and education. A well-crafted letter was a mark of cultivation, a display of one's intellect and character. Perhaps one of the most peculiar aspects was the concept of cross-writing. With postage still being a cost consideration and paper often expensive, Victorians developed a technique to maximize space. After filling a page, they would then turn the paper 90 degrees and write across their existing lines, creating creating a crisscross pattern of words. Imagine trying to decipher such a letter today, a dense thicket of overlapping script, requiring immense concentration and a peculiar kind of visual patience. It's a testament to their thriftiness and their determination to convey as much information as possible within the confines of a single sheet. The content itself was often highly codified. While personal sentiments were exchanged, they were frequently couched in formal language, particularly in the earlier Victorian period. Expressions of affection, while genuine, might be less overtly demonstrative than we are accustomed to today. Emotional restraint was a valued social virtue, and this often permeated written communication. Gossip, while undoubtedly present, might be subtly hinted at rather than explicitly stated, leaving much to be inferred by the discerning reader. But the real complexity arose in the unspoken rules, the subtle signals conveyed by the letter's very presentation. The fold of the paper, the way the envelope was sealed, even the number of sheets used, could carry meaning. And perhaps most intriguing of all were the silent messages conveyed through the use of perfume, color, and even the absence of a reply. What unspoken dramas unfolded within the elegant script, and beneath the careful folds of these Victorian missives, often hidden in plain sight from a casual observer. Our quiet delve into the world of Victorian correspondence now turns from the tangible mechanics of writing to the subtle, often unspoken language embedded within these handwritten missives. Beyond the choice of paper and the elegant script lay a complex web of social signals, secret codes, and implied meanings that could convey everything from undying affection to veiled disdain, all without a single explicit word. Understanding these peculiar practices is key to truly appreciating the intricate dance of Victorian social interaction, a world where silence and nuance often spoke volumes. One of the most fascinating aspects was the use of perfume. While today we might associate scented paper with casual, perhaps even childish notes, in Victorian times a delicately perfumed letter could be a powerful, if subtle, communicator. A faint rose scent might suggest romance or affection, while lavender could imply friendship or condolences. A heavy, cloying perfume, on the other hand, might be considered gauche or even indicative of ill repute. Imagine receiving a letter from a suitor, the faint scent of violet or jasmine drifting from the paper as you carefully unfolded it, adding an immediate, evocative layer to the words themselves. It was a sensory extension of the writer's presence, a whisper carried across the miles. Of course, discretion was key. An overly strong scent could be considered vulgar, while the wrong scent could send entirely the wrong message. The art was in the subtlety, the hint of a presence rather than an overt declaration. Then there was the intriguing, albeit often debated, practice of florography, or the language of flowers. While primarily a visual code for bouquets and gardens, some believe its influence extended to letter writing. A pressed flower tucked into a letter, or a subtle reference to a specific bloom, could carry a hidden message. A red rose petal for passionate love, a fern frond for sincerity, a withered flower for a love lost. While not universally applied to every letter, for those in the know, these botanical inclusions could add layers of secret meaning, allowing for expressions of emotion that might be too bold or improper to write out explicitly. This secret language thrived in a society that often valued emotional restraint, providing a clandestine outlet for deeper feelings. The folding and sealing of a letter also held significance. Before the widespread use of envelopes, which became common after the penny post, but were not universally adopted immediately, letters were often folded intricately so that the blank outer side formed the address panel. The way a letter was folded, the number of creases, and how it was sealed could, for some, convey subtle messages. A letter sealed with a kiss mark, for instance, might be seen as a playful declaration of affection. The color of the sealing wax, too, could hold meaning: red for passion, black for mourning, blue for fidelity. While these codes were not always rigid or universally understood, in certain circles they added another layer of clandestine communication. Perhaps the most anxiety-inducing aspect for the recipient was the timing of a reply. In a world without instant communication, waiting for a letter could be an agonizing experience. But beyond mere waiting, the speed, or lack thereof, of a response was often interpreted as a direct indicator of the correspondent's feelings or the urgency of the matter. A prompt reply, especially to a personal letter, might signal eagerness or deep affection. A delayed response, however, could be a deliberate snub, a sign of displeasure, or simply a lack of interest. Imagine the careful calculations involved. How long should one wait before replying to a suitor's letter to appear neither too eager nor too aloof? Too quick, and one might seem desperate. Too slow, and one might risk offense or losing the suitor's interest entirely. This delicate dance of timing was a constant source of speculation and social anxiety. Moreover, the handwriting itself was a subject of scrutiny. A neat, legible hand was a mark of good breeding and education. A flourishing, elaborate script might suggest an artistic temperament, while a hurried or messy hand could imply disrespect or a lack of care. For women, in particular, a graceful, elegant hand was considered an accomplishment, reflecting their refinement. Graphology, the study of handwriting to determine personality, also gained some traction during this period, adding another layer of self-consciousness to the act of writing. Consider the sheer social weight carried by a letter, especially one concerning courtship. A carefully phrased letter could initiate a romance, resolve a misunderstanding, or, with a single ill-chosen phrase, bring about a complete social disaster. Young women, often confined to the domestic sphere, relied on letters to maintain friendships and, crucially, to conduct their courtships. Every word was weighed, every nuance considered, for a misstep in correspondence could have profound social consequences. This intricate tapestry of unspoken signals reveals a Victorian society that was, in many ways, more subtle and nuanced in its communication than our own. It was a world where emotion was often conveyed through inference, where propriety dictated much of what could be explicitly stated, and where the act of letter writing became a performance in itself, laden with meaning. But what happened when these delicate threads of communication became tangled, or when a letter held a secret that was never intended for general consumption? And what became of these millions of personal histories, once the paper yellowed and the ink faded? Our final exploration into the quiet world of Victorian letter writing now turns to the ultimate fate of these meticulously crafted communications, their legacy, their occasional demise, and the way they continue to offer us a window into a bygone. Here, for every letter that reached its intended recipient, fulfilling its purpose of connection or conveyance, there were countless others that, through circumstance or design, held secrets, caused scandals, or simply vanished into the silent archives of time. These remnants of personal history, once vibrant with ink and intention, now offer a subdued echo of Victorian lives. One of the less charming yet historically significant realities of Victorian letters was their potential for intrusion and deceit. While the privacy of the post was generally respected, letters could and did fall into the wrong hands. Servants might be tempted to read their master's or mistress's correspondence, particularly if it contains juicy gossip or sensitive financial details. Unscrupulous individuals might forge letters or intercept them for illicit purposes. Even within families, privacy was not always guaranteed, and a letter intended for one pair of eyes might be inadvertently or intentionally read by another, leading to misunderstandings, heartbreak, or scandal. The very act of folding and sealing, as discussed, was often a rudimentary barrier against prying eyes rather than a foolproof one. Moreover, the formality and often circuitous language of Victorian correspondence, while elegant, could also lead to misinterpretation. What was intended as a gentle hint might be taken as a direct command. A nuanced expression of sympathy might be read as coldness. Without the benefit of tone of voice, facial expression, or immediate clarification, the written word, however carefully chosen, was always susceptible to the vagaries of individual interpretation. This was particularly true in delicate matters of the heart or in sensitive business negotiations, where a single ambiguous phrase could derail an entire venture or relationship. Imagine the silent anxieties produced by a seemingly innocuous phrase, pondered over endlessly by the recipient in the quiet solitude of their drawing-room. The physical longevity of these letters was also a consideration. While some were cherished and carefully preserved, bound into volumes or tied with silk ribbons, many others were, by their very nature, ephemeral. A letter conveying a fleeting piece of news or a business transaction might be read and then discarded. The quality of the paper and ink also played a role. Cheaper materials were more prone to decay, fading ink, and brittleness. This means that the vast majority of the millions of letters sent during the Victorian era have simply not survived, leaving us with a tantalizingly incomplete picture of their daily communications. However, the letters that have survived offer an extraordinary window into Victorian life, often revealing details and perspectives absent from official histories or public records. Personal letters document everything from the minutiae of daily routines, what people ate, how they spent their evenings, the state of their gardens, to the grand sweep of historical events seen through the eyes of those who lived them. They offer unparalleled insights into social customs, family dynamics, gender roles, health concerns, and prevailing attitudes towards love, death, and duty. Consider the letters of ordinary individuals, a young governess writing home to her family about the challenges of her new position, a working-class man sending money and news to his wife from a distant factory town, a woman detailing her struggles with illness and the latest domestic remedies. These are the quiet voices of history, often unheard in more formal accounts, whose personal narratives enrich our understanding of the period far beyond the grand pronouncements of politicians or the inventions of engineers. These letters bring the past to life, allowing us to empathize with the hopes, fears, and daily realities of people who lived more than a century ago. The legacy of Victorian letter writing is also evident in the very language and literary conventions that emerged from this period. The narrative structure, descriptive detail, and often reflective tone found in many Victorian novels owe a debt to the conventions of letter writing. The personal correspondence of famous literary figures, scientists, and politicians provides invaluable biographical material revealing their thoughts, struggles, and triumphs in their own unvarnished words. In our modern age of instant, fleeting digital communication, the practice of Victorian letter writing stands as a quiet counterpoint. It was a slower, more deliberate, and more tangible form of connection, one that demanded patience, careful thought, and a tactile engagement with the written word. Each letter was a physical artifact, imbued with the sender's effort and intention, capable of being held, reread, and cherished. The peculiar practices, the cross-writing, the perfumes, the coded timings were not mere eccentricities, but integral parts of a sophisticated communicative ecology, reflecting a society that valued formality, nuance, and the careful construction of social identity. As you consider the silent echoes of these forgotten letters, ponder how our own communication habits might be viewed by future generations. Will our endless streams of digital data convey the same depth of personal history, the same tangible sense of human connection, as a single, carefully folded, subtly perfumed Victorian letter? The peculiar world of Victorian correspondence, with its quiet rules and hidden meanings, offers a gentle reminder of a time when the written word was truly king, a period when communication was both an art and a profound act of personal presence. It leaves us with a lingering appreciation for the patience and artistry involved in reaching across the miles, one carefully penned word at a time. History Podcast for Sleep. What Sumerians ate for breakfast. Imagine waking up thousands of years ago, not to the gentle hum of a refrigerator or the enticing aroma of brewing coffee, but to the sounds of a bustling ancient city, the distant bleating of goats, and the promise of a meal utterly unlike anything you might encounter today. We are journeying back to Sumer, a civilization nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia, often credited with inventing writing, cities, and even the wheel. Yet amidst these grand innovations lay the very fundamental necessity of daily sustenance. What did the people of Sumer, the world's first urban dwellers, eat for breakfast? This seemingly simple question opens a quiet window into their daily routines, their agricultural practices, and the very foundations of their society, revealing a dietary landscape built on ingenuity and the humble bounty of their fertile crescent. Home. The concept of breakfast as a distinct, specialized meal might be a modern construct. For the Sumerians, daily eating habits were likely more fluid, centered around the rhythm of agricultural labor and the availability of food. There might not have been a strict first meal of the day, distinct from others, but rather sustenance consumed as needed throughout the morning hours. However, we can reconstruct what typical early-day sustenance would have consisted of, drawing from archaeological discoveries, cuneiform tablets detailing rations and recipes, and the analysis of ancient plant and animal remains at the absolute core of the Sumerian diet, and thus their morning sustenance was barley. This hardy grain, more resilient than wheat in Mesopotamia's sometimes saline soils, was the staff of life. It was consumed in virtually every conceivable form. Imagine, then, a common scene in a Sumerian home as the first light of dawn touched the mud brick walls. The air would be filled with the earthy scent of something being prepared from barley. This could be barley bread, though not the light, airy loaves we know today. Sumerian bread was often a dense, flat, and coarse affair, made from roughly ground barley flour, sometimes mixed with water, and then baked on hot stones or in simple clay ovens. It would have been substantial, providing slow-release energy for a day of hard labor in the fields or bustling in the marketplace. Another ubiquitous form of barley consumption was barley porridge or gruel. This was likely the most common breakfast-like meal, particularly for laborers, soldiers, and the poorer segments of society. Barley grains, perhaps cracked or lightly milled, would be boiled with water, creating a thick, sustaining mash. This porridge could be incredibly plain, offering pure caloric intake, or it might be seasoned with available herbs, a sprinkle of salt, or a few drops of oil if one was fortunate. Imagine the simple, filling warmth of a bowl of barley gruel, a comforting start to a long day under the Mesopotamian sun. For those living a modest life, this would have been the equivalent of our oatmeal, a reliable and accessible form of early morning nourishment. Beyond barley, the Sumerians cultivated a variety of other crops. Dates were incredibly important, serving as a primary source of sugar and calories. Date palms thrived in the hot, arid climate, and their fruit could be eaten fresh, dried for storage, or pressed into a sweet syrup. A handful of dried dates, chewy and energy-rich, would have been an excellent addition to a morning meal, providing a quick burst of energy before commencing arduous tasks. Their sweetness would also have been a welcome contrast to the often bland barley preparations. Onions and leeks were also dietary staples, known for their strong flavors and ability to grow relatively easily. While perhaps not the centerpiece of a breakfast in our modern sense, these would have been incorporated into various stews or served alongside bread, offering a pungent kick and valuable nutrients. Imagine biting into a piece of flatbread, perhaps dipped in a little sesame oil, and then a crisp piece of onion to cut through the richness. Legumes, such as lentils and chickpeas, were another vital source of protein, especially in a diet where meat was a luxury. These would often be boiled into thick stews or purees, while possibly more common for a midday or evening meal. Leftovers from such a stew could easily have been consumed in the morning, providing a dense, satisfying start to the day. Water was, of course, the primary beverage. However, the Sumerians also enjoyed beer, and not just as an evening indulgence. Ancient Mesopotamian beer was a thick, nutritious, and relatively low-alcohol concoction, often containing residual barley solids. Almost like a liquid bread, it was a staple beverage for all ages, providing calories, hydration, and perhaps a touch of gentle euphoria. It's not hard to imagine a worker having a small ration of beer as part of their morning sustenance, a practical energy boost that also provided a sense of comfort. The brewing process, which involved fermentation, also made the water safer to drink. Meat, for most Sumerians, was a luxury reserved for special occasions, religious festivals, or the tables of the elite. While some morning meals might include small amounts of dried fish, or perhaps a few pieces of preserved meat for wealthier individuals, it was certainly not a daily occurrence for the common person. Dairy products, primarily from sheep and goats, were likely consumed in the form of yogurt or cheese, which would have been easier to preserve in the hot climate than fresh milk. A piece of salty, crumbly cheese alongside bread and dates would have made for a more substantial and flavorful morning meal for those with access to such provisions. What emerges is a picture of a remarkably practical and resourceful diet, centered on durable grains and supplemented by the bounty of their irrigation-fed lands. The Sumerian morning, in its culinary simplicity, reflects a society deeply connected to its agricultural rhythms, where sustenance was about survival and efficiency. But how did these basic ingredients make their way from the fields to the tables? And what more complex flavors awaited the Sumerian palate throughout the rest of their day? Having established the foundational elements of a Sumerian morning meal, primarily barley in its various forms, supplemented by dates, legumes, and perhaps a dollop of cheese, we now turn our attention to the intricate systems that brought these staples from the fields to the communal table. The Sumerian diet was not simply a matter of individual choice. It was a reflection of a highly organized, often centrally controlled, agricultural and economic system, a testament to their innovative approach to sustaining large urban populations. Understanding this logistical backbone adds a deeper layer to our appreciation of their seemingly simple breakfast. The fertility of Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, was not a given. It was the product of immense human ingenuity. The Tigris and Euphrates, while providing water, were also prone to unpredictable flooding. To harness these waters for reliable agriculture, the Sumerians developed sophisticated irrigation systems. Imagine a sprawling network of canals, ditches, and levees meticulously planned and maintained, diverting water from the mighty rivers to parched fields. This was a monumental communal effort, requiring coordinated labor and centralized management, often overseen by temple authorities or nascent city-states. It was these engineered landscapes that allowed barley, dates, and other crops to thrive, forming the very bedrock of their food supply. Without this mastery of water, the flourishing cities of Sumer would have been impossible. Once the barley was harvested, it needed to be processed. This typically involved threshing, separating the grain from the stalks, and then milling, grinding the grain into flour. The milling process, especially in earlier periods, was arduous. It was often carried out by women, using heavy stone querns, a large, stationary lower stone, and a smaller upper stone that was rotated by hand. Imagine the rhythmic, grinding sound that would have permeated Sumerian households, the dusty air, the sheer physical effort required to produce enough flour for a family's daily bread and porridge. This labor-intensive process meant that flour was a precious commodity, its production a fundamental part of daily life. The distribution of food was also highly organized, especially in the larger city-states. Temples and palaces often functioned as central granaries, collecting vast quantities of grain as tithes or taxes. This collected grain was then redistributed to laborers, soldiers, and officials as rations. Cuneiform tablets. These remarkable clay documents inscribed with wedge-shaped marks provide detailed accounts of these rations. We can read about the daily allocations of barley for different classes of workers, or the quantities of beer provided. This system of rations was a crucial element of the Sumerian economy, ensuring a basic level of sustenance for the populace, even if it meant a degree of dietary monotony. Beyond barley, the Sumerians also had access to a surprising variety of other foodstuffs, though perhaps less common for a typical morning meal. Fish from the rivers and canals were an important source of protein, often dried or salted for preservation. Imagine the pungent aroma of dried fish, perhaps rehydrated and cooked into a simple broth or stew. Wildfowl, like ducks and geese, were hunted, and domesticated animals included sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle. While beef was a luxury, sheep and goat meat and their milk products were more accessible. The fat from these animals, rendered down, would have been used for cooking or as a supplement to meals, adding crucial calories and flavor. The garden, too, played a significant role. Small plots adjacent to homes or larger communal gardens provided vegetables and herbs. Cucumbers, lettuce, various greens, and legumes would have been grown. These additions would have provided freshness, vitamins, and a welcome variety to a grain-heavy diet. Imagine a Sumerian cook perhaps adding freshly picked coriander or mint to a pot of simmering lentil stew, or scattering chopped spring onions over flatbread. These small touches would have elevated the simple morning fare. For those with means, the diet extended to more exotic items. Trade routes, both riverine and overland, brought in goods from distant lands. Spices, dried fruits, beyond dates, and perhaps even small quantities of specialized oils would have adorned the tables of the wealthy. The ruling elite and temple priests would have enjoyed a more varied and luxurious diet, including more meat, finer breads, and rare delicacies. Their morning meals might have been more akin to elaborate brunches, featuring roasted meats, rich cheeses, and sweeter preparations. The social and ritualistic aspects of food were also important. Feasts and communal meals, often associated with religious festivals or important civic events, would have been opportunities for richer, more diverse eating. These gatherings would have been a stark contrast to the daily, utilitarian consumption of barley porridge. They were moments of communal bonding, celebration, and spiritual connection, where the bounty of the land was shared and offerings were made to the gods. Understanding the Sumerian breakfast, therefore, is not just about a list of ingredients. It is about recognizing the complex interplay of agricultural innovation, centralized economic systems, social hierarchy, and the sheer human effort required to feed a burgeoning urban civilization. It speaks to a remarkable resilience and adaptability in shaping their environment to sustain life. But what were the broader implications of this grain-centric diet on Sumerian society, and what echoes of their eating habits can we still discern in the modern world? Our final consideration of the Sumerian breakfast leads us to ponder the enduring legacy of their dietary practices and the subtle ways in which their ancient eating habits echo into the present day. Beyond the direct consumption of barley and dates, the Sumerian approach to food shaped their society, influenced their innovations, and left a lasting imprint on the culinary traditions of the ancient Near East, and ultimately our own. The humble morning meal, a simple act repeated daily by millions, had profound and far-reaching consequences. The reliance on barley as the primary staple had a direct impact on Sumerian daily life and societal organization. It was the currency of their economy, the basis of their labor contracts. Workers were often paid in barley rations, and the foundation of their agricultural calendar. The entire rhythm of their year, from planting to harvest, revolved around this single grain. This dependence fostered a highly communal and organized society, as the management of irrigation systems and large-scale grain storage required collective effort and centralized authority. The morning bowl of barley porridge, therefore, wasn't just sustenance. It was a physical manifestation of this intricate societal structure, a reminder of the collective effort that brought it to their tables. The Sumerian diet, while seemingly monotonous to modern palates, was incredibly efficient and surprisingly nutritious for its time. Barley provided ample carbohydrates for energy, while legumes offered essential proteins. Dates supplied sugar and fiber. The fermentation of barley into beer, in addition to providing calories, also made the water safer to drink in a region where fresh, potable water could be a challenge. This resourceful adaptation to their environment allowed them to support some of the earliest and largest urban populations in history, a feat that hinged on their mastery of food production and distribution. The innovations spurred by the need to feed their burgeoning cities are still felt today. The development of sophisticated irrigation techniques, the systematic cultivation of staple crops, and the large-scale storage of grain laid the groundwork for future agricultural advancements. Even the earliest forms of writing, cuneiform, were initially developed for administrative purposes, to keep detailed records of rations, agricultural yields, and trade transactions, essentially to manage the complex food economy. So the very act of Sumerians eating their breakfast had a direct, albeit distant, connection to the invention of written language itself. Furthermore, the Sumerian diet contributed to the broader culinary landscape of the ancient Near East. Many of their staple ingredients and basic preparations, particularly flatbreads and grain porridges, became foundational elements for subsequent civilizations in the region, including the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. The traditions of growing barley, dates, and legumes, and the methods of preparing them were passed down through generations, subtly influencing the diets of countless peoples for millennia. Beyond the practical, there was a spiritual dimension to food. Offerings of bread, beer, and other foodstuffs were central to Sumerian religious rituals, connecting the mundane act of eating with the divine. The gods were believed to require sustenance just as humans did, and offerings of the best. Produce were made in temples to ensure divine favor and continued fertility of the land. Thus, the food that sustained a Sumerian in the morning was also part of a larger spiritual ecosystem, binding humanity to the gods and the natural world. In our modern world, we often take for granted the incredible diversity and accessibility of our food. Our breakfasts can range from elaborate concoctions to quick, on-the-go meals. Yet the principles of relying on staple grains, supplementing with fruits and vegetables, and preserving food for future consumption are practices that stretch back to the very dawn of civilization. The Sumerians, with their humble barley porridge and dried dates, laid some of the earliest foundations for what we now recognize as organized agriculture and food security. So, as you consider the quiet beginnings of civilization, imagine the Sumerian waking with the sun, ready to face the day's labor. Their breakfast, simple and unadorned, was more than just a meal. It was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of environmental challenge, a product of sophisticated social organization, and a quiet ripple that helped set the course for much of human history. The boring history of what Sumerians ate for breakfast is, in fact, a fascinating story of survival, innovation, and the enduring power of a handful of grains to shape the very foundations of human society. It reminds us that even the simplest acts of daily life can hold profound historical significance, linking us across the vast stretches of time to those who first built our world. Boring history for sleep. The forgotten fashions of 18th century Greenland. Imagine a world not of elaborate silks and powdered wigs, but of sealskin and caribou hide, where fashion was dictated not by fleeting trends in European courts, but by the relentless demands of survival in one of the Earth's most unforgiving environments. We are journeying to 18th century Greenland, a land of vast glaciers, icy fjords, and a vibrant, resilient Inuit culture. While European sensibilities often dominated discussions of fashion during this period, the clothing of the Inuit in Greenland was a master class in functional design, a testament to centuries of accumulated knowledge about surviving extreme cold, and a fascinating example of how materials dictated style. This is a quiet exploration of garments crafted for life, not just for appearance, a truly boring yet profoundly significant aspect of human adaptation. When we speak of fashion in 18th century Greenland, we are primarily referring to the ingenious clothing of the indigenous Inuit people. European presence in Greenland during this period, though growing, was still largely confined to a few coastal trading posts and missionary settlements. While European sailors and traders might have brought their woolen coats and tricorn hats, these were utterly impractical for the local climate and way of life. The Inuit, on the other hand, had perfected their attire over millennia, developing a sophisticated system of layering and material use that allowed them to thrive in temperatures that would quickly prove fatal to the uninitiated. The core principle of Inuit clothing was insulation through trapped air. This was achieved primarily through the use of animal skins, particularly from seals, caribou, reindeer, and sometimes polar bears or birds. Each material brought its own unique properties. Sealskin, for instance, was remarkably waterproof when properly processed, making it ideal for outer garments worn during kayaking or hunting near water. Caribou hide, with its hollow hairs, provided exceptional insulation, trapping a layer of warm air close to the body, making it perfect for inner layers. The painstaking process of preparing these skins was a fundamental aspect of life, often carried out by women, involving scraping, drying, stretching, and sometimes chewing to soften them, a laborious but essential craft. A typical 18th century Inuit outfit would involve multiple layers, each serving a specific purpose. The innermost layer, worn directly against the skin, was often made from soft caribou fur, with the fur facing inwards. This created a plush, insulating barrier. Imagine the sensation of soft, warm fur against your skin, a comforting cocoon against the biting wind. This layer would absorb perspiration, helping to keep the body dry. Over this inner layer came a second outer garment, also typically made of caribou hide, but with the fur facing outwards. This outward-facing fur provided additional insulation and acted as a barrier against wind and snow. The combination of two layers of fur, with the hairs facing opposite directions, created a double layer of trapped air, maximizing warmth. This multi-layered approach was a brilliant solution to maintaining a stable body temperature in extreme cold, allowing the wearer to shed or add layers as activity levels or external temperatures changed. The design of these garments was also crucial. They were often loose-fitting, allowing for air circulation and preventing compression of the insulating layers. The traditional anorak or parka, a hooded pull-over garment, was a hallmark of Inuit fashion. The hood was an essential feature, often trimmed with fur, designed to protect the face from frostbite and provide additional warmth around the head, where a significant amount of body heat can be lost. Imagine pulling that fur-lined hood tightly around your face, feeling the immediate warmth and protection from the icy gusts. The trousers, similarly, were typically made of animal skins, often caribou, and designed for warmth and flexibility. For footwear, the kamek, a type of boot, was indispensable. These were typically made from sealskin, which provided excellent water resistance. The soles might be made from thicker, tougher hide, while the uppers were softer. They were often stuffed with insulating materials like dried grass or moss, acting as an inner sock layer and worn over inner socks made of caribou fur. Imagine walking on snow and ice, your feet surprisingly warm and dry inside these expertly crafted boots. Gloves or mittens, often made of sealskin or caribou, completed the ensemble, ensuring that hands, particularly vulnerable to frostbite, remained protected. The overall aesthetic was one of robust functionality and streamlined efficiency, perfectly adapted to a life of hunting, fishing, and traveling across a frozen landscape. There were no superfluous frills or purely decorative elements that would compromise warmth or mobility. Every stitch, every seam, every choice of material was made with the overriding goal of survival. While European fashion was characterized by rapidly changing silhouettes and intricate ornamentation, Inuit fashion was driven by unchanging environmental imperatives. Yet within these functional constraints, there was still room for subtle forms of expression. The quality of the stitching, the combination of different fur types, the careful tanning of the hides, these were marks of skill and artistry appreciated within the community. Sometimes contrasting colors of fur or patterns in the stitching might add a touch of visual appeal, but always within the bounds of practicality. The beauty of Inuit clothing lay in its perfect harmony with its environment, a testament to deep ancestral knowledge. But how were these raw materials obtained, processed, and crafted into such vital garments? And what roles did specific tools and social customs play in this quiet yet profound world of Arctic couture? Our quiet exploration of 18th century Greenlandic fashion now turns from the finished garments to the painstaking processes and specialized tools required to transform raw animal hides into the essential clothing that enabled survival in the Arctic. This was not a quick or easy endeavor. It was a year-round commitment, a deeply ingrained cultural practice, and a testament to the remarkable ingenuity of the Inuit in harnessing the resources of their harsh environment. The very fibers of their clothing were imbued with immense effort, skill, and communal knowledge. The journey of a piece of clothing began, of course, with the hunt. Seals were perhaps the most crucial animal for clothing, providing not only meat for sustenance but also waterproof and durable skins. Caribou reindeer provided warm, light fur ideal for inner layers. The successful hunt was a community effort, a dangerous but vital undertaking that brought fresh resources to the settlement. Once an animal was caught, its skin was meticulously removed, a skilled task in itself, ensuring the hide remained as intact and unblemished as possible. Then came the preparation of the skins, a labor-intensive process primarily undertaken by women. This was arguably the most critical step in ensuring the longevity and effectiveness of the finished garments. The fresh hide would first be scraped clean of any remaining flesh or blubber using specialized tools, often made of bone, stone, or, later, metal. This scraping was essential to prevent decomposition and to ensure the material was pliable. Imagine the rhythmic scraping sound, the effort involved in preparing each hide, knowing that lives depended on its proper treatment. Following the scraping, the hides underwent a complex series of drying and softening techniques. Caribou hides, with their hollow hairs, were particularly susceptible to becoming stiff and brittle if not treated correctly. They would often be stretched and pegged out to dry in the cold air, sometimes being worked repeatedly by hand or chewed, to break down the fibers and make them supple. This chewing, often done by older women who had lost most of their teeth, was a remarkable, if somewhat surprising, method of tenderizing the hides, making them soft and comfortable against the skin. Imagine the quiet, focused work, the tactile engagement with the animal's skin, transforming it from a raw material into a usable fabric. Sealskins, intended for waterproof outer garments, required a different treatment. After scraping, they might be degreased further and sometimes soaked in urine, a natural source of ammonia, to help break down fats and make them more pliable. They were then repeatedly scraped and rubbed with oil to imbue them with their water-resistant qualities. The process for sealskin was long and meticulous, ensuring that the finished product would shed water effectively, a vital feature for hunters. And kayakers navigating icy waters. The sewing tools used by Inuit women were as ingenious as the garments themselves. The most important tool was the uluk, a crescent-shaped knife with a handle in the middle of the blade. This versatile tool was used for skinning, scraping, and cutting the hides with precision. For sewing, bone needles and later iron needles, obtained through trade, were essential. But the true innovation lay in the thread. Sinew, taken from the tendons of caribou or other animals, was meticulously prepared, split into fine strands, and then twisted to create incredibly strong and durable thread. This sinew thread, when wet, would swell and create a tight, waterproof seam, an ingenious detail vital for Arctic survival. The stitching techniques themselves were highly specialized. Inuit seamstresses employed various stitches, but the most renowned was the waterproof stitch. This involved stitching only partway through the skin layers, so that the needle never fully pierced the outer surface, preventing water from seeping through. Imagine the skill and precision required to execute such a stitch perfectly, ensuring the integrity of a kayak jacket or a pair of waterproof boots. This was not merely sewing. It was a form of engineering, a critical component of their survival technology. The design of the garments, as mentioned, was driven by function. However, within these constraints there was still room for subtle aesthetic choices. Different colors of fur, from light caribou to darker sealskin, could be combined to create patterns. Trimming hoods with specific furs like wolverine or wolf was not just decorative. These furs had properties that resisted frost buildup from breath better than others. The precise cut of a garment, the neatness of the seams, and the quality of the finish were all markers of a skilled seamstress and a well-cared-for family. These were quiet expressions of pride and artistry within a profoundly practical craft that the knowledge required for this entire process, from hunting and skinning to tanning and sewing, was passed down through generations, often from mother to daughter. It was a vital part of their cultural heritage, ensuring the survival of the community in an unforgiving landscape. Every stitch in an anorak, every curve of a comic, represented centuries of accumulated wisdom and practical adaptation. It was a communal endeavor, a silent agreement that everyone played their part in creating the essential clothing that kept them alive. This deep reliance on local resources and ancestral knowledge contrasted sharply with the European fashions, emerging from distant, milder climates. While European clothing was often designed to signify status and adherence to rapidly changing trends, Inuit clothing was a pure expression of survival and ingenious adaptation. But what was the interplay between these two distinct worlds of fashion when Europeans began to establish more permanent presences in Greenland? And what happened to these remarkable clothing traditions as external influences began to seep into the Arctic? Our final, quiet contemplation of 18th century Greenlandic fashion brings us to the subtle, gradual, and often profound changes that began to ripple through Inuit clothing traditions as European influence slowly but steadily increased. While the core principles of Arctic survival wear remained paramount, the introduction of new materials, tools, and aesthetic preferences from the outside world began to weave new threads into the ancient tapestry of Inuit fashion, leading to both adaptation and, eventually, a quiet transformation. The arrival of European traders, whalers, and missionaries in the 18th century brought with it new goods, previously unknown to the Inuit. Among these were European textiles, wool, cotton, and linen, as well as metal needles, scissors, and glass beads. Initially, these items were exotic luxuries, often acquired through trade for furs or other Arctic products. While they didn't immediately replace the traditional animal skin garments, they began to be incorporated, sometimes subtly, into the existing clothing. Imagine an Inuit seamstress meticulously crafting an anorak from caribou hide, but now able to use a finer, sharper metal needle instead of a more brittle bone one. This would have allowed for smaller, more precise stitches, potentially improving the garment's durability or aesthetic finish. A length of brightly colored European wool might be used to line a hood or to create decorative trim, adding a splash of vibrant color to the otherwise natural hues of fur and leather. Glass beads, a European trade good, quickly became popular for embellishing clothing, adding intricate patterns and personalized designs to otherwise functional garments. These additions were not just about aesthetics. They also symbolized access to valuable trade goods and could subtly enhance social status. However, the introduction of these European materials was not without its drawbacks. While woolen cloth could provide warmth, it lacked the windproof and waterproof qualities of properly prepared sealskin. Cotton, while soft, was utterly unsuitable for wet, cold conditions, as it loses all insulating properties when damp. Thus, while adopted for inner layers or decorative purposes, these textiles never fully replaced the essential outer layers of animal skin for active outdoor wear, particularly for hunting and travel in extreme weather. The Inuit, with their deep practical knowledge, understood the limitations of these new materials in their specific environment. The influence also flowed in the other direction, though less visibly in terms of fashion. European explorers and whalers often adopted elements of Inuit clothing for their own survival in the Arctic. They quickly realized that their heavy woolens and canvas coats, designed for milder climates, were inadequate for the biting cold and damp conditions. The simplicity and effectiveness of the Inuit anorak, the warmth of caribou fur, and the waterproof nature of sealskin boots were lessons learned through harsh experience. Accounts from expeditions often detail European reliance on Inuit-made garments or adaptations of Inuit designs, a quiet testament to the superiority of indigenous knowledge in extreme environments. As the 18th century progressed into the 19th, and European colonization in Greenland deepened, the impact on traditional clothing became more pronounced. Missionaries encouraged the adoption of European dress, associating it with civilization and Christian modesty. Trading companies made European cloth more readily available, often at prices that competed with the labor-intensive production of traditional skins. Over time, the balance shifted. While traditional skin clothing remained essential for hunting and survival in the most extreme conditions, European-style garments became more common for daily wear, especially in and around the settlements. This transformation was gradual. Inuit women, renowned for their sewing skills with skins, adeptly adapted to working with cloth. They began to produce hybrid garments, combining elements of traditional design with European materials. For example, a sealskin parka might be lined with imported flannel, or trousers might be made of European cloth but cut in a traditional style. The distinctive silhouette of Inuit clothing, particularly the hooded anorak, persisted even as the materials changed. The long-term legacy of these forgotten fashions is complex and deeply interwoven with cultural identity. While traditional skin clothing is no longer the everyday attire for most Greenlanders, its cultural significance remains profound. It is celebrated in cultural events, art, and ceremonial dress, symbolizing resilience, ancestral knowledge, and a unique connection to the Arctic environment. The skills of skin preparation and sewing are still taught and practiced, ensuring that this vital aspect of their heritage endures. The story of 18th century Greenlandic fashion is a quiet, yet powerful narrative of human ingenuity, adaptation, and cultural exchange. It reminds us that fashion is not merely about fleeting trends or decorative display, but often at its most fundamental level about survival and profound connection to to one's environment. The ingenious use of animal skins, the meticulous crafting of each stitch, and the deep understanding of insulation and protection represent a fashion system born of necessity, refined by generations of experience, and quietly enduring even as new worlds collided. It offers a gentle lesson in the enduring wisdom of indigenous practices and the remarkable ways in which humans have, throughout history, clothed themselves to thrive in even the most challenging corners of our planet.